And I'd like to welcome to the stage Nicole Bivens Collinson and Sean Spicer. Come on up. I'm not sure. There's Nicole. All right, check it. Just getting ready. Sean, real pleasure to have you back at WITC, Sean. It's been a little while. Those of you may not know that Sean was the spokesperson for the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Why don't you, Sean on this side and Nicole over there. How are you, my friend? Good to see you. Sean was part of our community before he moved on to some other notable positions. He's currently the host of the Sean Spicer Show on YouTube, and of course is the former press secretary and communications director, the first press secretary and communications director for President Donald Trump. But before that, and before when he was with the DNC, he was with USTR, and that's when he got to know many of us. I can't think of a better person to talk about trade and politics in 2025 than Sean, and he's joined today by current WITC board member and member of our executive committee, Nicole Bivens Collinson, the managing principal and operating committee at the International Trade Practice at Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg. Thank you, Nicole. We're going to try to get everybody out of here a little before the weather hits, so really appreciate your making it here a little early, Sean, and Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you. So one of the things you heard is the perfect lead-in from Senator Scott, right? Talking about communicating and trade. So that's exactly what we want to talk about today. And as you heard, Sean has had some experience in communicating about different issues and communicating with the current president. So I think one of the things that a lot of, Senator Scott said they don't sit around the dinner, you may have missed this, but he said they don't sit around the dinner table in South Carolina and talk about international trade and all of these types of issues. That's not their, what do you call it? The tabletop discussions? What's the buzzword?
Kitchen table.
Kitchen table, thank you. Kitchen table discussions. It is at my house, but we're all weird. But given that and knowing that, how would you advise companies or groups or think tanks or associations like WITC in the best way to try to talk about trade or communicate the implications of the actions that the president may be taking to a wider community of those people who don't talk about this, who just, all they know is my eggs are $8 a dozen?
Right. Well, first, thanks to Ken and WITC for having me back. It's been a few years. I remarked to Nicole that the last time I was in this room, it was a restaurant. So if you don't know that, then I just dated myself. When it comes to President Trump, there are two issues that if you go back and look at him through the decades, immigration and trade are two things that he's talked about for decades. But he also is a builder and a restaurateur and a club owner, so he understands visas and immigration and the need as part of the job market. What I think really gets to him is at the essence of the America First agenda. Why don't we have market access in places where they're getting access to our market, right? And that always hasn't been the fundamental driving principle of U.S. trade. To some degree, sometimes we want countries we use that as a tool to help grow their economy. And I think fundamentally he believes that in many cases we're being ripped off or we've been taken advantage of for too long in a lot of sectors. And so to answer your question, I think part of it is to come at him as some have in the past by saying, "Oh, you're wrong." It's like you've just shut the argument out. And for those of us who are married or in relationships, I mean, it's like literally having that fight and saying, "Well, here's where you're wrong." The argument stops then, and no one's listening to each other anymore. I think with President Trump, part of it, and Senator Scott was mentioning this to some degree at the end, is articulating the impact that you have. So for example, there's a lot of pieces or components that we import to make something here in this country, right? And so if that piece costs more that we can't build, and that's the other thing, each company or each product is unique. So if you're competing with a U.S. manufacturer, you're probably going to lose the argument. If you are a key component in something that is largely built in the United States, I think that's when you try to argue that, hey, look, I get your point. We don't have this rare earth mineral. We don't have X. And so therefore, it's just going to cost us more. And that will happen because we will never bring back jobs to the United States. But I would drive all messages to U.S. investment and to U.S. jobs. So if what you're doing leads to greater U.S. jobs, spell that out. If it somehow is part of a larger investment strategy. But that's where the argument, and find maybe the give, which is he wants to get something out of a negotiation at all times. So what is it that maybe the sector can give, or that, if there's a non-tariff barrier, what concession could there be? But going into it and trying to argue, like I said, which a lot of people have, like you're wrong on this, is just a futile tactic.
Do you think that the communication is a two-way street?
Yeah, I think if you look at what happened with Australia yesterday, how you interpret that two-way street is very different. Like the Prime Minister came out and said, I had a great discussion, and I think I got a carve out on steel and aluminum. Then 20 minutes later, Trump announces steel and aluminum tariffs with no exceptions. I think developing a relationship with him and his team is important. Again, I've watched too many times the tactic of trying to think that you're going to go in there and be the smartest person in the room and explain to him why he's wrong. It's just it's a losing tactic. But it is a two-way conversation that if he maybe didn't fully appreciate the fact that, hey, look, this is why we do what we do on this particular sector or this product, and that it's not as bad, or what we get in return for this is X, and this feeds this much U.S. investment or job creation. But bring it all back to this country. Why is it beneficial to the United States? Because in many cases, as you guys know, I mean, trade's a complicated subject. And I remember when I was at USTR, we had filed the first IP case in the WTO against China. And a bunch of people cheered us, and then the Chinese didn't show a U.S. movie in China for 6 months. And the industry was like, thanks. So sometimes the easiest thing, which is, oh, you should just go fight this case, on its face seems really easy, except when you realize that there are additional consequences or negative ramifications that can occur. So kind of walking through the scenario sometimes is helpful.
Who do you think has the president's ear the most on trade issues? Is it Peter Navarro? Is it Howard Lutnick? Is it Bessent? Who do you think?
Yeah, it's like a 5.
Is Bob still back there whispering?
Well, Greer's moving forward today, I think. We'll see. I think, with all due respect to him, I think he doesn't enjoy the same personal relationship that Lutnick in particular does, Stephen or Peter. But I would say that if I had to put everybody who has a serious voice in there, obviously Susie Wiles is the chief of staff, that goes without saying. But when it comes to people who he's going to turn to on the issue, Peter Navarro obviously is huge. Stephen Miller, huge. Kevin Hassett, well-respected voice in the administration. And then obviously I think Lutnick, who will come into the fold more, because once he fully takes over at Commerce, President's got a relationship with Howard, and I think that means a ton to him. And obviously he respects Scott Bessent a lot, but I don't think they're that close yet, and it'll probably get closer. But if I look back to 2016, I mean, yes, he knew Wilbur, but it wasn't like Wilbur was out there banging the drum for tariffs. I could say something else, but Mnuchin, again, it wasn't a big thing for Mnuchin. Gary Cohn was a brilliant businessman, but not exactly like fluent in MAGA. And this time it's a much different thing. There were plenty of times when the president was wanted to get something done, and frankly, people would walk out of the Oval and be like, okay, we're going to delay it here for 4 days, and you're going to put a study together. We'll meet with them again next week. We'll tell them, and they would figure out how to slow walk it. You're not seeing that same resistance this time. It's more, I think, a discussion of how can we do this best, maybe more targeted, maybe more surgical, but it's happening. Like, anybody who doesn't think he's going to keep going back to the tariff well is sadly mistaken. And again, I have these people who love to come at me with these intellectual arguments about that argument's over. He has been decades long firm on his position. You're not going to convince him otherwise. So it's going to happen. If I were Europe right now, I would be very concerned about your auto sector. That's literally just sort of, I mean, it's when you watch that stack of executive orders, just next time. I mean, there's one at 3 o'clock today. Just guess which one that is, or maybe Friday. But
Reciprocal.
it's coming. So I think, those are the people that have the biggest voice in this. The one thing about Trump world, and it's a lot more controlled this time, is last time it was always the last person in the room. And Navarro was like a ninja at figuring out how to get into the Oval dining room when no one saw him. Like, he's a really thin dude, but I don't know how there are days where I'm like, how did he get through that door? And he would walk in with a bunch of charts and be like, Mr. President, this is what we need to do, and here, I'll press go on the Twitter account now. So the last person still matters, but there's a much more unified staff this time, which is very different because Peter's not climbing up the hill that he was last time. I think that the environment now is going to be very different for those two reasons. And I also think that, like, I've said this before, that there should be at some point like a college seminar on the impact that not having consecutive terms impacts the presidency. This president understands the people, the process, and the policies in a way that you don't as a consecutive president, because you just keep going if you're back to back, right? It's not like you get re-sworn in or there's any break. You just spend half of a day going through the inauguration process again. But they've had 4 years out of office, and to think about what will I do if I get back? Who are the people that are going to help me do it? Who are the people I need to get out of the way? What are the processes by which I can move forward, and how do I block the other side? And then what are the policies that I want to implement? The work of America First, the work of Heritage, is not for naught. Like, it's happening, and they all are going in and executing. If you haven't gotten a copy of Project 2025, I would go look at it. I'm not saying that it was ever like, but that's where a lot of the thinking is. I always likened it to like a menu at a restaurant. The president never signed off on it. He wasn't taking anything, but that's guiding the thinking of a lot of people.
I think that's very good. But when you're listening to what the president says, what is it you listen for? Because I've heard some other people speak who formerly served with the president, and they said when they see threats of high tariffs, 25%, 50%, 100%, that's generally the negotiating position. That's a negotiating tariff. But if you hear like a 10% or something, that's one that's going on.
So I think it also comes down to the way in which the question's asked. So yesterday, when he read the steel and aluminum stuff, it was on paper, it was fully vetted, he was ready to go, this is what it means, this is what's happening, boom. When he gets asked a one-off question by a reporter and he's like, that's a good idea, I'll probably throw tariffs out this week, that's generally probably where his head is, but it's not baked. And so that's when the staff will come in and say, okay, we need to probably guide this a little bit more. But the where and how he says something matters, okay, and the tone and tenor of it. If it's literally surgical, like we're going to do 10% on autos starting Friday, okay, maybe it's not Friday, maybe it's Saturday, but it's happening. If we could go as high as 25% on Morocco next Friday, it's okay, that doesn't sound as baked. That was just an example in case you were writing it down. It's not.
I got it down here. We got the autos.
In case someone's here from the Moroccan embassy.
Got it. We got it. So we let them know.
Okay.
What do you think the idea is behind the threat of the tariff reciprocity? Now, that's a big thing because, as you said, the Project 2025, first thing you do, if there's anyone in this room who has not read the trade chapters, shame on you. I would be ashamed to say that I am a trade wonk if I have not read those 2 chapters yet. But trade reciprocity is huge.
I don't think you need to read Project 2025 to know that.
Well,
look, go back to the 80s when he was talking about it with Japan. He truly believes that it's ridiculous the way that we're allowing certain products, giving them market access to the United States, and then basically not allowing our products of a similar nature into their markets. And it's been consistent for decades. So that is something that he has said over and over again. He believes in his heart. He says it privately and publicly. There's no question in my mind. So I've gotten asked by some clients, I've been asked by, on some TV programs, like, what about this country? And my answer is go through your trade schedule. If you guys are screwing us on something, I don't know every product that you're sending to the United States, but it could be actual tariffs. It could be a non-tariff barrier, like an emissions issue or something like that. We're gonna fight you on. I mean, like, then just, you might buy some time, but that's it. He believes strongly in this.
It's very interesting you say that, because one of the first things that I did do when he was elected the first time was I went and checked out The Art of the Deal and read that book. And I started taking pictures of some of the pages in there because he was talking about Japan. He was talking about this, and I'm like, this dude has been talking about this forever. So
Yeah.
he is consistent, if nothing else, which is useful. But in the idea of reciprocity, we know, because we're wonks, that every single HTS number, every single product has a different tariff rate, and every country has a different HTS schedule, and that they're only unified out to 6 digits, and yet we do 10 digits. And so the idea of an actual product-by-product reciprocal tariff would mean that if I'm classifying, my shoes, I'm going to have to know what the tariff rate is for 192 countries. Because when it comes in, but
That's where the staff comes in, right?
automatically, though.
But part of this is, and this is where like a guy like Kevin Hassett, who's just a brilliant economist, says, okay, because what I said about 2016, you have to understand that, like, he would say, I want to do X, and then people would walk out of the Oval and say, okay, how do we slow this down? How do we stop it? The opposite is happening now, which is how do we come back to him and say, hey, we're doing it. And here's how. The details are not, you think he's looking at that number going, hey, that's actually, you skipped a digit there. What about corn no. They're going to walk back in and say, Mr. President, we're delivering what you asked us to. Here's the paperwork to back it up. And he'll go. I mean, I don't know that any president would get that, unless like Bob Lighthizer got elected. But like outside of that, like no one's going to have that level of detail. So they're going to come back in, tell them it happened. And I'm not in like a nefarious way, not trying to, but they're going to go back, sit down, and that's where, from a staff standpoint, they'll fight it out. And so does Navarro say, hey, let's get much more specific, or do they go general category? I mean, like, and that's where you guys make your money, is going in and making the case that, okay, this is the least painful way to do this, or impactful way, or this is the way that it's not going to, but, this is where you make your money in D.C., to be blunt, is that people can go in and explain this is why this deserves a carve out, or this isn't necessarily the case, but and knowing who's got the ball, like who's driving that thing. Among the 5 or 6 people, there's going to be a couple of those staffers that I mentioned that are leading this fight. And so what are you doing to make a case to them, to be compelling to them? That's critical.
Yeah, that's sort of where I was going to go with my next question, is like who, we've been given the outline in the America's First trade policy. So we know who's going to be in charge of certain reviews in certain areas. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is that if there are certain concerns in certain areas, then you need to go to, if it's Navarro heading this one, or if it's...
Kind of. The problem is that President Trump doesn't care what your title is. I mean, there's a funny kind of story depending on... I mean, there were days when I'd walk in the Oval and he'd be like, Sean, go do X. And I'd be like, well, that's actually Stephen's job. He's the Treasury Secretary. He'd be like, okay, well then call Stephen, but get it done. He doesn't look at it like, okay, that's your job, you do this. He looks at everyone and empowers them. So if Navarro's the guy in the room, then Peter's going to be the guy that gets tasked with that and follow up if Stephen Miller's in the room. So it's not as precise as to say, well, the Commerce Department does X. So we're going to have to go to Lutnick and his team. I mean, yeah, if the political intelligence is that, hey, we talked to some senior folks, Howard's leading on this, or he's assigned it to one of the undersecretaries or whatever, then yeah, but you can't just assume that because there's a traditional model that says USTR has this, Commerce has that, Treasury has this piece, whatever, that's how it's going to go.
Well, I think that's clear. I mean, we've got the Commerce Department notifying the president whenever duties can be collected. And I've just never seen the Commerce Department collect duties. That's generally CBP. So there's...
Well,
really...
last night he announced that Doug Collins was going, the VA secretary is going to lead the Department of OGE, Government Ethics.
Inspectors
Office of Government Ethics. So, I mean, he doesn't care. Like, this is not a guy who goes, let me go get the job description and figure it out. He's like, you, go do it.
Yeah, I guess I think some of the problems that we're having is that, from a congressional standpoint, certain agencies have certain jobs, and have been, that's where their money comes from.
But part of this,
to do what they're
Nicole,
doing.
is in general, people have to unwrap their head around like there's not everyone. The thinking of this is how it always works is gone. The idea of saying like it always works this way and you can't do that is just not in the lexicon anymore.
I mean, for me, like the ERS, CBP already collects duties and tariffs, so we already have that.
Okay.
So we just rename it?
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Is it a part of Treasury now? Is it its own standalone? I mean, I've seen polling on it. Everybody thinks it's a great idea. I mean, so again, you're getting into the details of this, which I understand. That's your job, all of your jobs, and I respect it. But the point is that like that's why I'm saying the model of saying this is how it's supposed to work.
Well, I mean, I've said that before, that the paradigm is completely shifted.
Yeah.
And that we have to be a little bit more flexible. It's just, I think part of the confusion is what we saw with respect to the additional 10% tariffs on China. I think there are a lot of people who agreed with him saying that if you have a product coming from China and it's subject to this 10% tariff, you can no longer use the de minimis,
right,
or e-commerce, what I call lane, right? You can't go on the HOV lane. You got to get into a different lane. I don't think there's anyone who really disagreed with that very much because of the threat of the packages coming in and drugs and everything, using that as their means to get into the U.S. commerce. But the issue is that because it's half-baked in my mind, they haven't approached the entities to which would be effectuating this so that it becomes, it's like watching kids, 5-year-olds play soccer. They can't figure out what they're doing. They all get in a scrum and kick each other, and then suddenly a ball squirts out over here, and everybody runs that way. And so what happened was the president then had to walk back what he had said a day later and amend it and say, sometime in the future this will happen. And I'm just wondering, is there any communications that are going on to say, nobody thinks what you're doing is wrong, and maybe some people think maybe some people think it's wrong, some people think it's right. Regardless, if you want it to happen, you got to do certain things, and you got to let certain agencies know, and you have to do certain steps. But if it doesn't happen, we wind up with this, what appears to be complete flip-flops back and forth.
I think the answer, I wish I could give you a better answer, but it depends. So there are times when, like I said, you walk in, somebody gins the president up on an issue, and he says, okay, go make it happen. And there's a difference between that and, okay, I got it, we'll get back to, like, let me go back and socialize this, we'll run it through, the deputies, committees, et cetera, and get this finalized for you. It's going to be an issue-by-issue basis, depending on who's championing it, what they're saying to him about how quick we need to do something. On trade, though, like when it comes to tariffs and stuff like that, like I said, his default is, okay, let's go. It's decades in the making. It's not like it's a tough sell. And he's got a team that's ready to do it, and they'll figure it out after, is kind of the mentality. Because I think what happened is there is a PTSD of the first term where he knows, oh, I saw what you did last time. You guys are just going to tell me this. You're not going to, you come back next Tuesday, telling me that you're doing a study. Then the following Tuesday, you come back with a PowerPoint. Then you're going to tell me you need to hire somebody. And so he's hip to the game, which is, I see how you guys slow walk this stuff. And he's like, I'm not doing it again. So in some cases, I think you're going to see this situations where things have been well thought out, well executed. Like when Tom Homan took over the day after, you saw how that was executed. Whether you supported it or not, the bottom line is they knew what they were doing. They knew where they were going. When Elon went to USAID, it wasn't just because it was lower on the alphabet and they went bottom up to agriculture. It was they knew exactly where to go hunting and they knew exactly what to expose. And so some of these things are going to be a lot more thorough than others. It's just going to depend on the issue and who's championing it. Like, are they walking in and saying, this happened, let's do this, and him saying, okay, go. But there's no hidden book that says these are the ones that are ready to go and these aren't. But there are some texts out there, like you said, whether it's Heritage or Project 2025 or Conservative Partner Institute. Like those will give you a sense. If it's in there, then it's like, okay, that's sort of a battle plan ready to go.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, at first, people were thinking if we have tariffs, that question is gone.
Oh, and the funny part is, I honestly, if someone came to me on November 7th, 8th, or whatever, and said, hey, we're still wondering if there's going to be tariffs, I would have said, you're gone. Like, that just shows a complete misunderstanding of what he said. I mean, there's just some people who still haven't gotten the memo.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have people asking, do you think he's going to impose tariffs on the EU? I'm like, absolutely.
Oh,
it's a matter
like
of
I said,
when.
it's a matter of when. Pick which EU. I mean, again, look at the stacks on the desk and guess which one it is. But it's happening.
And then the next thing is for how long? I think that's one of the things that if what I've been watching is in the communications is if there is something that is measurable that can be changed.
Yeah.
Then that tariff might be shorter in duration.
It also has to do, in my mind, at least if you look at the pattern, who and how. So in the case of Canada, because of the trade agreement, it had to be like you couldn't just go in and do it. You had to find a creative way. And if you even look at Navarro's comments, he did an event with Politico, and he was like, this is completely about fentanyl and immigration. Like,
in the deficit.
Everybody got the talking point that, like, we have to say this to avoid a challenge to emergency powers. So depending on the trading partner is what they're going to say to him, Mr. President, here's the way that we can do this, legally or without the greatest likelihood of challenge.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I noticed as it came out at first, the talking, and the president stuck to the talking points, but then afterwards, it suddenly became about the economy.
Because that's where that was not, as far as I'm concerned, that was something that he wanted to say, and they were like, you have to say this. And it was just always going to be in the back of his head.
And sometimes you say those things out loud.
You do.
And so
one does.
One sometimes does say that. And when one does say that, sometimes that causes problems, because then the question is, what can Canada do or Mexico do in order to address the inequities? Buy more LNG, resolve the milk issue, resolve the softwood lumber. There's a lot of outstanding things that they could do in the trade world.
Start.
Right? I was just putting together what I thought they could do.
But and they are. As far as I know, they are working hard on that to try to get some stuff together. And I think it's a smart move by them to recognize, they can either do it now or after they become a state. It's their call. Come on.
Are they the 51st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th? Because we've got Canada, we've got Panama.
Panama won't. No. Just the canal. They don't get to no.
Okay, we don't get the whole thing. Okay.
Greenland, no.
Greenland?
It's a territory.
Oh, that's just going to be a territory.
Well, I'm from Rhode Island, and so I'm very sensitive about another state becoming the smallest. So I don't want Greenland as a state. Territory only.
Only a territory. Okay, what about Gaza? Are we going to make the Riviera?
Same thing, territory.
We'll make that a territory.
Or just luxury hotel zone.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be all right. So we're going to have a few more states. I actually had dinner with some folks from Panama, and they were talking about the most recent visit by Secretary of State Rubio and what that might mean, from this administration looking at our backyard. Are we going to start being a little more territorial? I
got to say, though, the one thing is, look, whether it's Gaza or Panama, I think for the first time, having a president that understands our national security interests, what we need to do, the idea that you had China being so interested in what was going on at a port is a national security issue. Greenland, whether or not we take it over or not, or just expand our military footprint there is a national security interest there, regionally. And so some of these things, do make, just for too long we've sat back and said, well, this is how it's always been. We can't really do anything. I was in the Oval with the president when we talked about NAFTA, and I was sort of putting on my USTR hat, and I was like, well, it's in force, sir. You can't do anything. He goes, so what? And I was like, well, legally. He's like, what? So? And you started to think about how outdated a lot of that was, whether it was IP or dairy or autos. The mentality that you just can't do something is too pervasive in this town. And I think sort of being willing to examine things and figure out whether it's waste or a new approach is a breath of fresh air.
I think that there's a lot of ways to try to consider some of the different changes, and change is good. And sometimes it is a little bit painful. But I'm just wondering, with respect to the plethora of tariffs that we're seeing, how is that going to impact those folks who are sitting around the kitchen table and thinking about the price of that car, that washing machine, the new furniture, maybe even food, because we could have a situation where, our farmers are retaliated against. They are used as a target for retaliation of other countries. And so how do you think that shifts into that kitchen table conversation?
I think the impact of prices will be a factor, right? So where does that matter? If the President of the United States is told, hey, a cost of a Toyota is going to be more than but Fords and Chevys, or he's going to go, awesome. If I can bring back manufacturing and jobs to this country, that's great. I think there's ways to, as we saw with China in his first term, to try to help farmers. So part of it is it's going to depend on what the product is, what the issue is, and also the political blowback. There's two issues here. There's the logistical and practical application of it, and there's the political piece. And Chuck Schumer sitting around with a Corona talking about how your Coronas are going to cost more wasn't exactly, to me, a showstopper that was saying, oh boy, he's going to be ruined the day he did this.
And your avocados.
Yeah, I don't like avocado or guac. So, but the idea that you're basically saying that your political pushback is Chuck Schumer screaming at a microphone with a Corona doesn't exactly make him have any pause and say, wow, this is going to be tough to get through. So how Americans deal with any potential increase in price, what products that it does. The president also this time, I think, was interesting. He's consistently said there might be some short-term pain. He recognizes that there may be some that prices may go up in the short term, but the long-term benefit will be to bring manufacturers back home. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to every sector, right? There are certain things that we just don't do or manufacture, so you can't say that's going to apply. But if you yesterday in the Oval Spray, you saw Lutnick talking about, well, last time you did this, you brought this many jobs back, and and immediately we took the tariffs off. So if he's got people around him that are saying, for a couple of months it's going to be tough, but we're hearing companies that are going to move back and they're going to do this or that, or they're going to, create a new plant here, that's going to be encouraging to him.
I think one of the things that has been concerning to me, and I've talked about it recently in my little podcast, my 2 minutes in trade, and I call it chronic tariff fatigue. At some point, I have companies who have said, I've spent so much money moving my manufacturing. And
But if they moved it to the U.S., they wouldn't move again.
No, they moved it to the U.S., but they don't have the vertical supply.
Right.
So the inputs aren't there. And now they've moved it here. They took the expense, just basically packed up what they had in China, moved it over here. It's now in Pennsylvania. They're making something, but they can't get all the inputs here.
Well, that goes back to the first thing that you asked about, which is how do you sort of communicate that better, which is how do we get that message across? Hey, I moved this plant over here from China. I'm hiring so many U.S. workers. But I got to tell you, the other thing that was very telling to me about New Year's was this H-1B visa fight between Elon and Bannon. And I once in a while, I will think something funny or whatever and put something up on Twitter and just do like a 2-day poll. And like 700 people will vote. It's just, sometimes it's silly, sometimes it's serious. And I said, all right, H-1B visas, settle this. I'm with Elon, I'm with Steve. 100,000 people voted in 48 hours. 67 Bannon, 33 Elon. I was actually shocked by that result. And the depth and breadth of the comments. The pervasive view on H-1B is that, hey, look, we've got to hire these high-tech skilled workers, People are done with that excuse, at least on the right, and say, you know what, then we need to start training people better. We need to start doing this. We've got to stop, bringing in foreigners and at the expense of U.S., maybe we need more education. Whatever it is. And my view is, okay, even if you want to do that, there's a short-term and a long-term solution here. But I'm just telling you that the dynamic and the mentality is changed. This cutting and all this stuff, people are like, okay, I'll give you a lot of political space on this stuff. I put a new poll out on my show. It'll air tonight, 6 o'clock on YouTube.
Watch it.
Okay, but by and large, most of the president's policies are getting bipartisan support, but more than that, the right is 100% behind him. So there's no, he's like, let's go. Let's keep knocking down walls. And so part of it is to figure out how to construct arguments that swim with the tide as opposed to against it. And so finding those holes where you say, okay, your stated goal is to do X. We're doing X and we can do more, but here's why we can't fully do it. That's at least a somewhat compelling thing. Like the team understands that. So in the case of your companies or clients, like part of it is to make sure people understand that, like, okay, we're there, we did it. We've moved, we've brought back this, but here's where we can't do it. And is that a US, like, hey, there's the only way that you can import X is through a mine in Zimbabwe? You know, and if that's the case, and it's like, hey, we can't do that here, full stop. It's not a labor issue. It's not a training issue. Then I think that's where I think you're going to see a more effective and compelling argument than just going, well, we don't want to move back or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't envision us having rubber tree farms anywhere sometime
Possible.
soon. I don't know where they grow. Tell me where they're going to grow, okay? I just want to know where they're going to grow. Do you think it helps if you go on Fox News and talk about this to communicate messages? Or Twitter? X, whatever it is? Truth?
So I have this like long-standing frustration with a lot of people in my profession that don't understand the difference between a tactic and a strategy. So I have a lot of clients that'll be like, hey, can I get on Fox News? Oh, yeah, let me call Hannity. I'll get Sean to put you on tonight. It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. Like, it's not how it works. And if you think that, like, your random boss is just going to happen to show up on Jesse Waters tonight, like, I don't have that many pictures of Jesse doing bad things, so I can't. But so the answer to your question is, sure, it can be very helpful to go on Fox and to make a case. You saw Joel Kaplan do that with Meta. Mm-hmm. Like, there's ways, but one, you have to have the ability to do that. And as a guy that has, like, I've been in this business for a long time, I know most of those guys personally, it doesn't work like that. You can't just call and say, can you call and do this? And I would charge a heck of a lot more if you could. So how do you create an environment? And there's a lot of ways to do that. But to answer your question more broadly, yes, if you can make a compelling case sometimes the media loves to talk about the audience of one, but there's probably an audience of like 100 of key folks that are making decisions, and get that out there and get support, right? So you also have to be careful. Like, if you go out there and let's say that you go on Fox and then Bannon goes after you on War Room, Jack Pacific attacks you, a bunch of the guys in the Blaze, then you're done. So if you think just an appearance is going to settle this on anything, then you've missed the boat. So creating a strategy where you create an echo chamber on the right that says one unknown piece of this thing is, or, you know, the interesting thing about company X is after President Trump's first term, they moved their entire factory back, This widget can only be purchased from, we would love to figure out a way to do that, but until this is happening, sure. So, they were most of this town is predicated on lobbyists, and I'm biased because of what I do for a living, but I would argue that the more that you create an effective communication strategy to get the word out among key players. I had a client the other day that asked me, shouldn't we do a social media campaign? And I said, why? We don't need the public behind us. We need 50 people at this one agency to know that we're doing this and feel like it's rising to the top. So it goes back to creating a strategy that says, who are you trying to influence? What's the message you want to get them through? What's your CTA, your call to action? Who can you get on your side? But I do think that more than any other administration in modern history, having an effective communication strategy probably is equal or trumps an effective lobbying strategy. Because if it's a lobbying strategy, you're going after, I'm going to get a meeting, we're going to sit down. I get it; those are critical. It's a both and, not a one or the other. But we need to have the meeting, then remind them that they're seeing this, and the president's going to see that message, or key staff is going to have that. But yeah, if you can do that, I think you're in a much more you have a much greater chance of success.
And how would you, for the Washington International Trade Association, what would you recommend as an association with lots of little mouthpieces out here? How would you suggest, or do you have any suggestions for trying to get out some of our messages?
Well, I'll keep it very high level. I would say, look, go back to what I said at the front, that how you can talk about U.S. The problem is with trade in general, some of you have a much better story than others. Like how much, if you're a European car maker trying to talk about how you trade, like, it may not be a good luck, send some free cars. But if you're somebody who has an industry that you need 3 products that we don't, you're in a much better place. If you have a national security issue or an energy exemption, those are going to play a lot more than we just, we've got a lot of employees in the U.S. I mean, like, so overall, I would say go back to the key tenets, which is this many jobs rely on this. This is how much investment has happened. But those aren't selling with him. You don't think that Trudeau and the foreign minister are bringing up, bilateral trade with the U.S. and I mean, that's like the ag community in particular has been very forceful in this, the Farm Bureau and others, making the case for the impact that some of these products have on our agriculture. Like, it's not that those arguments aren't being made. So trying to get back to investment in the U.S., jobs created here, further investment, is what makes, I think, a much more compelling case than just saying, like, we're going to throw out 20 trade stats. Like, this is not the Bush years where we could talk about bilateral trade and that argument doesn't sell with Republicans anymore. Never mind this White House. I mean, the issue has I think lost a lot of luster in Congress itself, especially among the Republican Party. And so to answer your question, I think trying to redefine what impact a lot of this has on the U.S., on sectors, on jobs, but not try to sell it in the same traditional way. It's just not, you've lost the Republican Party. And it was funny, I made a very similar case to folks at the end of the Bush administration when we were pushing the last 3 FTAs through, that it used to just be the default position on an FTA or an issue like that. Okay, we're free traders. I think what we've exposed in a lot of ways is saying, you can be, I got asked this on an interview yesterday, didn't you guys used to be for free trade? And I'm like, we're not for stupid trade. Like at a certain point, Europe's not a third world country. It's not a developing nation. And so why are we allowing them to say, hey, we want full market access in these particular sectors, and then we don't? So that's not an unreasonable position. And I mean, you can quibble with some of the other stuff, but I think the American people are on that side. And so trying to redefine the terms of what trade looks like, but just saying I want free trade, it's been kind of, it's like the Wizard of Oz pulls back the curtain kind of thing, where people are saying that doesn't seem free to me. It sounds like lopsided trade.
I'm getting it. Okay. Well, take a couple questions. I'm sorry, I just got so engaged. I was not paying any attention. Mara.
Hi. I want to ask.
Identify yourself.
Sure. International Trade Today. Sorry, I can't talk really loud.
Sorry about that.
Merrily, International Trade Today. So there's been reporting that Europe is willing to drop their tariff on cars to 2.5%. I know that there's also talk about the VAT and that allegedly being a tariff barrier, of course, that doesn't consider our sales taxes, which do the same thing. But at any rate, if Europe does drop its tariff to 2.5%, how does that change the stance on reciprocal trade in that product, do you think?
So I don't speak for the president anymore. You can see by the color of my face. But if I had to guess, reciprocal to him means even. Whatever we get, you get. Now, on the VAT, it depends on the case that's being made. Where does that, so the question is, does a Kevin Hassett, for example, say, hey, their VAT has this much impact on a vehicle sale, our sales tax, maybe on average, if you look at the different states, is this? It's a wash. Okay, if that's the case, I think it fares well. But if it's like, hey, we're lowering ours to 2%, you guys still have 0, that's not reciprocal. That's better.
Well, we have to.
I know. I'm just saying to you that better is not reciprocal in the president's mind. Again, caveat, I don't speak for him. But If it's not equal, it's not reciprocal in the way that he has generally historically viewed trade. So if Europe is willing to say, in this sector, we're willing to do this, but then the question becomes, what else do they have on their dance card, right? So is it like, we've got cars and GMO, or, I mean, whatever it is. Like, I don't know, but by default, the president really cares about the auto sector. Maybe that's enough. I don't, we'll see. I'm sure he'll say something. It's, Stephen Miller's comments this week, the president's like, so we're at Tuesday, Jesus. It feels
and it's just past noon.
Yeah, it feels like a Thursday. Maybe it was a Super Bowl. So I would assume by the end of the week, you have a much clearer answer to that question.
Yeah.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your insight. My name is Desi Jordanoff, and I represent the Small Business Administration. What do you think the impact of all these tariffs would be on small and medium-sized enterprises? And especially, is there any process? We know there is a formal process, but was there any process given the opportunity to all these small businesses to say how these potentially tariffs would impact them? And it might be a negative impact for them to lose jobs or even their businesses. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's just going to depend on time and industry. So if you start seeing a group or an area of the country start saying, we do X in this, like Dalton, Georgia says, hey, all carpets are now going to cost a lot more. Then I think that's, but we won't know the answer to that for a little while. I was in the middle of a house renovation in the last Trump administration, and we just started to get, especially on lumber, it was like, okay, well, we know we gave you that, here's what it costs now. So I think it was funny, though, that didn't bubble up as much as you would have assumed. Maybe it's because we went into COVID, but we'll see is the answer. I just don't, you don't know until it happens. And I think it's going to be a little bit more sector specific than small businesses.
I would just say, if I were queen of the world and could fix all of this, you could look at it and have a process, which, Trump administration started down the road of having a process looking at specific products and then giving them across the board, which then it prevents cronyism, right? Because, one might say that the steel exclusion process was more cronyism than the USTR, that one was in commerce, and the USTR was more general. If one person got it, everybody got it. So it wasn't targeted for individuals. That was a good process that was going forward, I felt, in trying to address some of these specific needs. Like, I need that widget because it's just not made anywhere else. And then I felt like the Biden administration kind of went where I thought things should go more in this process where you could get an exclusion from the tariffs if you were bringing in machinery that was going to be used to manufacture that product here in the U.S. But then they defined what the machines were, and it's like, why are you defining them? You need to let the companies define it. And then they said, well, it's only going to be effective for this certain period of time. And I was like, but like my client, who was one of the first adopters and said, I'm going to do the right thing, exported his products in 2022, but yet he couldn't apply for that same exclusion in 2024?
I will tell you that, at least in the conversations that I've had, I don't think that President Trump is very high on exceptions this go round.
No.
It's a very, I think he might have even said it publicly, but he's just not, he saw how that was abused and how everybody kind of could make everything an exception. There are some specific cases that you guys have seen already, but generally speaking, it's a lot harder. Like, I think he saw how everybody started to say, oh, we're national security too. It's going to be a much harder sell. But that doesn't mean don't make the case. It just means that, that they're aware of, the back door being opened.
Well, he did say on the tariffs for steel and aluminum, no exclusions.
No exceptions, right.
No exceptions.
Well, I will say that both of you are exceptional, and very grateful to you for coming, making the time, Sean, to be here. I know you're very in demand these days, and really appreciate you making the time for WITA. Thank you all. We promised to get you out a little bit earlier today. The good news is it doesn't look like the flakes are coming down, although I looked at the weather report and it looks like it's coming close. So we're going to get you all out of here. I know there were a couple questions that folks wanted to ask, and sorry if we didn't get to all of those. I want to remind folks we have a USMCA series event that we're holding online on February 21st. Our congressional trade agenda with the 4 trade councils will be right here back in this room on March 7th. That'll be a hybrid event. And a big thanks again to our conference sponsors, Amazon, the National Pork Producers Council, Trade Data Monitor, UPS, Business Roundtable, American Apparel and Footwear Association, Coupang, the National Retail Federation, and of course our partners at Trade Center Management Associates and the International Trade Center here at the Reagan Building, who support all our in-person activities here at the Reagan Building. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your staying with us, and look forward to continuing the conversation about trade at WITA in the years to come. Thank you.